I never thought I would tell this story. In fact, I always imagined that some secrets should remain buried, hidden under layers of silence and oblivion. But here I am, unable to keep the weight of what I've experienced to myself. My name is Oliver, and what I'm about to tell you is neither a conventional ghost story nor an urban legend retold for generations. It's my life, a chapter I wish I'd never opened. It all began on a winter's night, when the rain batters the windows and the wind hisses secrets through the gaps in the doors. I had decided it was time to face my mother, Diana, a woman of rigid convictions and a deep distrust for everything she didn't understand. Sarah, my girlfriend, was the reason for the discord. She had a free spirit, a light that seemed to illuminate the shadows of my life, but for my mother, Sarah was a threat, an enigma that she couldn't or wouldn't decipher. The tension between them was nothing new, but that night, something changed. My mother, with eyes that seemed to swallow up the dim light in the room, accused Sarah of being a sorceress, of having bewitched me with some kind of black magic. Her words were like blades, cutting through any hope of reconciliation. I tried to argue, to defend the love I felt for Sarah, but it was in vain. Diana was unyielding, promising to do whatever it took to save my soul, as if I were under some spell that only she could see. The discussion was interrupted by a bang coming from the attic, as if something or someone was trying to break free. The next day, driven by a force I couldn't explain, I went up there and found an old book on witchcraft among old and dusty mementos. The book was marked on several pages, as if someone had been studying it intently. I confronted my mother about this discovery, but she denied any involvement with witchcraft, claiming that the book was just an heirloom with no meaning. But I knew there was more to it. Something sinister was unfolding, and I was at the center of it. The relationship between my mother and Sarah, the discovery of the book, the accusations of witchcraft, all of this was just the prelude to a terror that I still couldn't understand. And that's how the darkness crept into our lives, silent and relentless, ready to devour everything I loved. After the episode with the witchcraft book, things began to unravel in ways I couldn't have imagined. Sarah and I tried to get on with our lives, ignore my mother's accusations and concentrate on our happiness. But as we would discover, it's not easy to escape the shadows when they decide to chase you. One day Sarah called me, her voice trembling with fear. She had found a dead bird on our front doorstep, its eyes still open, as if it was watching us. At first I thought it was the work of some stray cat, but then it happened again, and then once more, each time with bigger animals. My mind refused to connect these events with my mother's threats, but deep down, I knew there was something darker at play. The nightmares started soon after. Sarah would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming, bathed in cold sweat. She described an old woman sitting at the foot of our bed, whispering terrible things as she watched her sleep. I wanted to believe they were just dreams, manifestations of the stress we were under, but the description matched my mother's in a way that made my blood run cold. Despite this, I was determined to keep the peace. I loved my mother, despite her eccentricities and her difficulty in accepting Sarah. I tried to convince myself that everything would work out, that Diana would eventually see Sarah as I saw her. That hope was shattered during a dinner at our house. With the intention of smoothing things over, I invited my mother along, hoping that somehow we would be able to get along. It was a tense evening. Diana barely disguised her disdain, casting venomous glances and comments in Sarah's direction. The words were not spoken directly, but the message was clear. Sarah was not welcome. At that moment, I realized that my mother saw Sarah not just as an intruder in our family, but as an enemy to be eliminated. And that's when I knew, with frightening clarity, that things would never be the same again. My home, which was supposed to be a refuge, became a silent battlefield where the weapons were glances and unspoken words. And somehow I was in the middle, torn between love for my mother and love for Sarah, unaware that this conflict was about to become the least of my problems. The situation escalated in a way I never imagined possible. The constant tension and unexplained events kept us on our toes, but nothing could have prepared us for what was to come. Sarah was poisoned. It happened suddenly, one night when she started to feel unwell after dinner. At first, we thought it was just the flu or food poisoning, but when she started convulsing, we rushed to the hospital. The doctors managed to save her, but warned that if we had taken any longer, she wouldn't have survived. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my mother was behind it. While Sarah was recovering, I immersed myself even more in studying the witchcraft book I found in the attic. The marked pages talked about ancient rituals, how to influence people's destiny, and even poisoning through magic. I confronted my mother once again, but she shut herself up in stubborn silence, denying everything. Her denials, however, were not convincing. I could see the truth in her eyes. The revelation came like a punch in the gut. In a moment of anger and frustration, my mother confessed that she had gone to a witch to get rid of Sarah. According to her, she was just trying to protect the family from a curse that Sarah was supposedly carrying. The irony of Diana resorting to witchcraft to fight a supposed sorceress didn't escape me. But any sense of humor died in the face of the seriousness of our situation. I was determined to take Sarah away from there, to any place where my mother and her madness couldn't reach us. But as we were leaving, our car simply stopped working, as if some invisible force was preventing us from leaving the city. At that moment, the truth became clear to me. My mother had become involved in something far beyond mere superstition. She had plunged into a darkness that now enveloped us, trapping us in a web of fear and despair. These events marked a point of no return in our lives. The reality I knew began to unravel, giving way to a world where fear and dark magic were as real as the love I felt for Sarah. And although I wanted to fight it, a part of me feared what was yet to come. The days that followed were shrouded in a fog of uncertainty and fear. The failed attempt to escape had made it clear that we weren't just dealing with my mother's irrational anger, but with something she had summoned, something that bound us to her in ways we could barely comprehend. It was then that Sarah began to see the shadowy figures. They appeared in the corners of our vision, disappearing when we tried to look directly at them. Sarah was the most affected, often waking me up in the middle of the night, terrified, swearing that someone or something was in the room with us. I wanted to believe that it was just the stress and recent trauma affecting her, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. My search for answers led me back to the attic, where I discovered, hidden under the layer of dust and oblivion, hidden symbols scratched into the floorboards. They were similar to the drawings in the witchcraft book, and a cursory search revealed that they were used in rituals to summon entities and forces beyond our comprehension. The reality of the situation finally settled on me. My mother had done something terrible, something that now threatened us all. It was during a particularly tense night that Diana finally revealed the truth. She admitted that she had consulted a witch, but not to drive Sarah away. On the contrary, she was trying to strengthen our bond, fearing that Sarah would leave me. However, the ritual demanded a price that Diana wasn't prepared to pay, and now we were all suffering the consequences. That confession was a breaking point. It was clear that my mother's actions had put us on a dangerous path, one that I feared I wouldn't be able to steer clear of. The tension between us became palpable, a thread stretched to the maximum, about to snap at any moment, and it broke that night when, in an act of desperation, I decided that the only way to protect Sarah was to face the darkness my mother had invoked. Our decision to confront whatever it was, to try to undo the damage done, was the first step on a path that would take us even deeper into the shadow that had fallen over our lives. But at that moment, all we knew was that we had to try, that we had to fight, not just for our love, but for our survival. Armed with a mixture of determination and fear, Sarah and I decided to look for the sorceress my mother had consulted. I expected to find someone threatening, but instead we came across an old woman whose gaze carried centuries of wisdom and sadness. She listened to us in silence, her eyes never leaving ours, as if trying to read our souls. When she finally spoke, her words dealt a heavy blow to our hopes. The pact my mother had made was irrevocable, an agreement sealed with forces that neither forgive nor forget. She had sacrificed something very precious in exchange for a power she believed she could control. The revelation shook us to the core. Despair overtook me as I realized that my mother's attempt to protect our family had doomed us. The sorceress offered us a glimmer of hope, a ritual that could weaken the curse, but warned that the risks were immense. It was a chance we were willing to take, no matter the cost. That night, as we prepared for the ritual, the house was filled with a palpable energy, as if we were being watched by thousands of invisible eyes. The air became heavy, difficult to breathe. We began the ritual with the sorceress guiding us through each step, each word pronounced with a precision that resounded off the walls of our house. It was then that the unimaginable happened. Sarah was attacked by an invisible force, thrown against the wall so violently that she was knocked unconscious. Panic set in, my mind struggling to understand what was happening as I tried to revive her. The sorceress, despite her shock, remained calm, insisting that we continue the ritual. It was our only chance. The confrontation with my mother came soon after. Enraged by our attempt to break the pact, she accused me of betraying our family, of letting myself be seduced by forces we didn't understand. The argument quickly escalated into a violent fight that left both physical and emotional marks. It was during this confrontation that our family's darkest secrets came to light. Revelations that would forever change the way I saw my mother and the legacy we carried. At that moment, I realized that the struggle we were facing was not only against the supernatural forces invoked by my mother, but also against the very darkness that resided within us, a legacy of pain and sacrifice that spanned generations. The truth was clear and terrible. We were entangled in a web of consequences from choices made long before we were born, fighting for a freedom we might never be able to achieve. The revelation of my family's secrets was only the beginning of a dark journey that Sarah and I were forced to face. The sorceress' words, although full of veiled despair, pushed us to find a way to break the curse that weighed on us. We delved even deeper into the book of Witchcraft, discovering ancient and forgotten rituals that promised a chance at freedom, however risky. The first step was to confront the truth about the protection my mother had invoked. What she believed to be a shield against evil was in reality a curse that required sacrifices to maintain its power. Each generation of our family had paid a terrible price, sacrificing what they loved most in the name of illusory security. My mother, in her attempt to control fate, had only perpetuated this cycle of pain and loss. With this painful realization, Sarah and I prepared for what we hoped would be our final confrontation with the forces that were ravaging us. Armed with the knowledge we had acquired, we began a counter-ritual in the heart of the night under a starless sky. The air was charged with an electric energy, and the shadows around us seemed to move, alive. The ritual was interrupted by a sudden fire. The flames spread rapidly, fueled by an invisible force that seemed to laugh at our efforts. My mother, refusing to leave the house, proclaimed that the fire was a necessary sacrifice, a purification. Her words, laden with a distorted faith, were the last I heard from her before the flames engulfed everything. Sarah was narrowly saved, but the marks left by that night were deep, not just on her skin, but on her soul. The violence of the supernatural attack she had suffered during the ritual left invisible scars, a constant reminder of the price of our fight against darkness. In the days that followed, as the authorities scoured the charred remains of our house, a sense of emptiness consumed us. Witchcraft artifacts, hidden in the shadows of our history, were uncovered, bringing to light the depth of my family's involvement with the occult. With each new day, the reality of what we had faced became more palpable, and the hope of a fresh start more distant. Neighbors reported seeing shadowy figures wandering around the destroyed property. Whispers of a curse not quite broken echoed through the empty streets. It was as if, despite our best efforts, the darkness that Diana had summoned still clung to the ruins of our existence, a cold shadow that refused to be dispelled by the light of dawn. The devastation left by the fire and the revelation of my family's dark secrets forced us to face a new reality, an existence marked not only by loss, but by the persistent feeling that darkness still surrounded us, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a new opportunity to manifest itself. Despite the efforts to rebuild our lives, Sarah and I were aware that the curse Diana had awakened was not completely silenced. Sarah, more than ever, became my beacon in the darkness. She threw herself into studying the book of witchcraft we had saved from the flames, seeking to better understand the forces that continued to haunt us. Her interest, initially a quest for protection, turned into an obsession as she flipped through the old pages in search of answers that might offer us a chance of ultimate freedom. With every spell and counter ritual we practiced, a part of me feared what this new facet could mean for us, for the future we were so desperately trying to preserve. It was during this turbulent time that we discovered the truth about the sorceress my mother had consulted. She wasn't a stranger, but a descendant of the same cursed bloodline that ran through our veins, perpetuating the darkness that surrounded us. The revelation that we were intertwined with our adversary by blood ties added a layer of despair to our struggle, making our situation even more complex and heartbreaking. In an act of desperation, we decided to attempt one last ritual, a final attempt to break the cycle of curses that seemed destined to consume us. We prepared carefully, aware that we were balancing on the edge of a precipice, where one false step could lead to total ruin. But what we found was not the deliverance we were looking for, but an unexpected intervention. A stranger appeared at our door, someone whose presence was both frightening and comforting. He offered his help, promising to guide us through the ritual with the promise of breaking the curse once and for all. But there was a price, a cost he refused to specify until we were ready to accept it. The uncertainty of this deal tormented us, but the possibility of finally freeing ourselves from the darkness that Diana had brought into our lives was too tempting to ignore. And so, under the flickering candlelight, and with our hearts heavy with anticipation, we began the ritual that we believed would be our last hope. Every word spoken, every gesture made, was a silent cry for freedom, a desperate plea for the shadows that surrounded us to finally release us from their cold embrace. As the days passed after the ritual, a deceptive calm seemed to have settled over our lives. However, the shadow of doubt and the weight of the undisclosed price constantly accompanied us. My dreams, once a refuge from daily tribulations, became the stage for vivid nightmares, in which my mother appeared again and again, scolding me with a cold anger for having defied the curse she believed to be our protection. Guilt and remorse consumed me, making me question whether we had really made the right choice. Sarah, for her part, isolated herself even more, devoting herself almost exclusively to the study of the occult, in a desperate attempt to find a way to protect us against the return of darkness. She believed that if she could fully understand the forces that threatened us, she could find a way to defend us. But I saw the toll that this obsession took on her, the light in her eyes fading little by little, replaced by a feverish glow of someone who had seen beyond the veil. It was during this period of frantic searching for answers that the truth about the stranger who had helped us with the ritual came to light. He wasn't just a connoisseur of the occult, but a keeper of ancient secrets, a being whose existence was intertwined with the curse that plagued our family. His help was not a gesture of benevolence, but part of an ancient game, a balance that sought equilibrium through sacrifices and dark pacts. The complexity of our situation became even more apparent when, one moonless night, an unexpected visitor knocked on our door. He was a middle-aged man with a piercing gaze and measured words, who presented himself as a mediator between worlds, someone capable of negotiating with the forces that were pursuing us. he offered us a solution, a path that could finally free our family from the curse that was consuming them. However, the price of this freedom was something he refused to specify until we were ready to accept his offer. The dilemma before us was torturous. The possibility of liberation came with an unknown cost, a blind choice that could lead us into even deeper darkness. But the alternative, to continue living under the yoke of a curse that was slowly consuming us, was a burden none of us were willing to bear. With heavy hearts and mind tormented by uncertainty, we agreed to listen to what the mediator had to offer, unaware that we were on the brink of an abyss from which there might be no return. With the decision to listen to the mediator, Sarah and I found ourselves on a threshold between the hope of liberation and the fear of the unknown. The man, whose presence emanated a disturbing calm, detailed what would be required for the final ritual. It was a process that required not only our total dedication, but also a personal sacrifice of a magnitude that none of us had anticipated. We reluctantly agreed, driven by the hopelessness of our current situation and the burning desire to escape the shadows that surrounded us. On the appointed night, under a dark, starry sky that seemed to watch our actions with countless eyes, we performed the ritual. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable energy, as if the veil between our world and another was thinning, allowing beings and forces beyond our comprehension to observe us, judge, and perhaps interfere. As the ritual progressed, the manifestations of our confrontation with the curse became physical and visible. Shadowy figures, only partially seen in the corners of our eyes, began to materialize, taking on forms that defied logic and sanity. They were the entities that had been invoked and fed by the previous rituals, each one a reminder of the choices made by my mother and the ancestors who came before her. At the climax of the ritual, a moment of absolute silence preceded an act of despair and sacrifice. I, driven by an unconditional love for Sarah and a desire to protect her at all costs, offered a part of my soul, a piece of my essence, as the ultimate price for weakening the curse that weighed on us. The pain of this sacrifice was indescribable, a sense of loss and emptiness that consumed me from the inside out, leaving me weak and vulnerable. In the days that followed, the police arrived, alerted by reports of paranormal activity in the area. They found us exhausted, shaken but alive, among the remains of the ritual. Their questions were answered with half-truths, because how could we explain the inexplicable? How could we make them understand the nature of the battle we had fought, not just against supernatural forces, but against the darkness within ourselves? That ritual marked the end of one journey, but also the beginning of another. The price I paid was high, and its consequences, although not yet fully understood, were beginning to show in my health and sanity. Sarah and I tried to hold on to the fragments of our old lives, searching for some sense of normality amidst the chaos we had faced. But the truth was that nothing would ever be the same again. The shadow of the curse, though weakened, was still present, a grim reminder of the sacrifice that had been necessary to give us hope of a future free from darkness. In the days that followed the ritual, the true extent of the price we had paid began to reveal itself. My health, both physical and mental, deteriorated alarmingly. The nights were the worst, filled with nightmares that dragged me back to that dark night, making me relive the moment of sacrifice over and over again. During the day, weakness consumed me, and I felt as if a vital part of me had been torn away, leaving a void that nothing could fill. Sarah, although physically unharmed by the ritual, was not immune to its consequences. The shadow of what we had faced hung over us, a constant reminder of what we had lost in the fight against the curse. We tried to find solace in each other, but the constant presence of shadowy entities, though now only fleeting glimpses and passing sensations, served as a bitter reminder that the battle might not be over. One night, something changed. The house, which we had tried to make a home again, felt strangely silent, as if it were holding its breath. It was then that Sarah disappeared. The frantic search that followed was in vain. She had vanished without a trace, without explanation, as if swallowed up by the darkness we were fighting so desperately to escape. Despair overtook me. The reality of my situation, alone, weakened by sacrifice, and now without the one person who gave me the strength to carry on, was overwhelming. The story ends here, not with the promise of better days or lessons learned, but with the somber acceptance that some battles, even those we think we have won, leave scars that never completely heal. The curse that plagued our family, though weakened, remained, an eternal reminder of the price of knowledge and power over the occult. Sarah's disappearance was the final blow, proof that the sacrifice I had made, though made with love and desperation, to protect her, had perhaps been in vain. The darkness, although receding, never truly left us. And I, scarred by what I lost, am now just a shadow of the man I used to be, wandering through a life I no longer recognize, haunted by the ghosts of what might have been and the haunted silence of what remains.